9 Euclid. This would be Connor. A lot of you have in the Discord, so if you would have caught my it's the same. I don't know if he suggests me anything.
Containment. Is Dr. Really strong. Good.
Okay, so the necklace that you anyone knows where I could buy.
Current deals. Lifespan. And
This necklace transferred between the D class, and then they obviously use them for whatever they want, and once it gets to the point they just offer it to people who don't know what it does.
peace. This directive. O5. Nations.
No thanks, I'm alright. I don't need lethal force.
Description. Which one is it? Take. Starboard.
So you need to know moves it was, from what I can tell, it seems like it turns amazing. So, I mean, there's a give and take. If, you know, you gotta give something.
According to P76 containment.
Means there was a shit ton of deaths and casualties.
Transporting SCP-9. Change came over to follow.
Interview kind of sounds like that.
C3-1 is removed at this time from D1113's position. Further MRI of the D1113's 963-1 is returned. We have a problem. Discovered that when any from host.
That's insane. So if you physically touch, your memory's gone and you get Dr. Bright memories in you. Died while carrying. I'm not sure who SCP-76 is, but
Maintain. Prevent self is performed. At least from it. Killed himself in the self is the 963. Those were given by replicated CP-963 until 92.
All information regarding SCP-963
Stephen Hawking.
T-2 is classified level 5. Anyone attempting to access further information about SCP-963-2 without level 5 clearance will be terminated.
Logical value.
Okay, so that was not what I thought it was. like his abilities, he actually has an. If you die, you put into this necklace and you technically become, which is quite insane. I don't know. Or start living again. Oh, right, you have to. Assuming your memories and everything as you come. Wonder if someone else died. And again, the original guy tried to put himself. Kill yourself, it doesn't work. So, poor guy killed himself for no reason. Yeah, that's the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe to me and the Volga.
这是小孩子嘛，然后内心就特别希望和他在一起。希望可以把我女儿的声音和形象能够，在这个像 AI 技术上把它还原出来。
所以我们这边的现在的技术呢，就是需要大概10分钟的一个干净的这个音频的信号。所以这块你现在有些什么素材？
坚决反对。我们今天做了这个声音的还原，明天是不是还要做影像？那未来是不是有可能克隆技术就会这个事情就没有办法控制了？
Recreated. Mornings.
我想听听我女儿的声音。
有一句名言，它让我明白什么坚持不懈。让我在失败和
就是有些地方是蛮像的，咬字啊什么什么的，有些地方就节奏有一点点不一样。
不太一样，对吧？
对。
Suppose we consider the question whether the souls of men after death are or are not in the world below. Now, if it be true that the living come from the dead, then our souls must exist in the other world. For if not, how could they have been born again?
You couldn't have explained that more clearly.
Then let us consider the whole question, not in relation to man only, but in relation to animals generally, and to plants, and to everything of which there is generation. Are not all things which have opposites generated out of their opposites?
Yes. What?
And the weaker is generated from the stronger, and the swifter from the slower, and the worse is from the better, and the more just is from the more unjust.
Of course, you're kidding.
And in this universal opposition of all things, are there not also two intermediate processes which are ever going on from one to the other, opposite, and back again?
Very true. I give up.
Well, is there not an opposite of life, as sleep is the opposite of waking?
There is.
And what is it?
Death.
Then suppose that you analyse life and death to me in the same manner. Is not death opposed to life?
Yes.
What is generated from the living?
The dead.
And what from the dead?
The living?
Then the living, whether things or persons, are generated from the dead. Then the inference is that our souls exist in the world below.
That is clear. Is it?
Then there is a new way by which we arrive at the conclusion that the living come from the dead, just as the dead come from the living. And this, if true, affords a most certain proof that the souls of the dead exist in some place out of which they come again.
Go on.
If all things which partook of life were to die, and after they were dead remained in that form of death, and did nothing not come to life again, all would at last die, and nothing would be alive. What other result could there be?
At this point, Socrates, I wish the result would be death.
Seems.
So here we are, let's unpack the cyclical arguments for the existence of the immortal soul. So at first in the dialogue, we seem to be told quite generally that whatever is living must come to be living, and whatever is dead must itself be living beforehand. So if this works, as I think Socrates mentions himself, it's got to be true of like plants and animals as well as humans. So with this and a few of the clarifications in mind, one of the clarifications being he doesn't mean the soul here, the soul is always living. We can state the argument briefly as follows. So all things come to be from their opposite states. He says, for example, a larger thing must have been smaller before. Between every pair of opposites, there are two opposite processes. For example, between smaller and larger, there are processes of increase and decrease. He uses that example in the text. If the two opposites did not balance each other out, and this is crucial, everything would eventually be in the same state. So if everything started becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, then nothing is going to exist that is large. Since being alive and being dead are opposite states, and dying and coming to life are the two opposite processes, coming to life must balance out dying, and therefore everything that dies must come back to life again. So that's the argument as it is. Everything has an opposite state, there's processes in between. Being dead and being alive are opposite states, so the process must equally be balanced. Right, so therefore everything that dies must come to life and vice versa. What are our thoughts? What's our analysis?
As you've already highlighted, and Socrates will propose an argument for why he thinks this later, is that it's not the soul that is dying because it is not within the quality of a soul to ever be dead. And so when he's saying all that dies must come back to life again, the thing is, in some like roundabout way, technically speaking, you could say, fine, I can see that there is something to this, in that, like, let's just say, like on a physicalist account, if all you are a collection of atoms, and then when you die, that kind of goes back into the earth, and it's the whole circle of life sort of thing, fine, but that's not really what he's wanting us to accept.
Is that fine though? Because you could just say that there's a possibility that life could just come to an end, and he seems to rely on the idea that it's
I
not
haven't even
possible.
mentioned that bit yet, which is that it is entirely possible that the universe, right? And so there is no cycle that continues to happen. Like, okay, fine, in closed systems like the Earth, at the moment, there is this cycle and this pattern, but that doesn't mean that cycle must go on forever. That itself is false.
So we've got this like finite set of souls, and which are continually coming in and out of existence on this picture. I guess one thing to say, and something we'll talk about later on, is that Socrates thinks eventually all souls will end up like getting out of the cycle of rebirth. So if time plays out in the fullness of time, let's say, we can expect all souls actually to leave the cycle, and therefore it's kind of self-defeating. that we don't expect things to keep living on Earth over and over again, because he himself is quite pleased, as we found in the last section, because he's not going to be reborn again because he lived the philosopher's life. I think it's really important here, if we take the idea of what an opposite is, we'll find the defeater of the argument. Nothing we've said at this stage will knock the argument down. I think we can categorize opposites in 3 different ways. One way we might say things can be opposites are relations. So like Andy loves Ollie, and therefore there's an opposite to that relation, which is Ollie is loved by Andy. And logicians tend to agree that every single relation has its converse. But that necessitates that there's an object on either side of it, as we'll find in a minute. It can't be, life and death can't be the opposites of each other, because there needs to be a property or an object to fill the gap. So it can't be an object in that sense. Second, we could say that opposites come in pairs, like he uses the example large and small and hot and cold. But these pairs create like a scale. But there's no reason to think that one opposite must come from the other. Imagine a beautiful person, a beautiful man or woman, whoever takes your fancy. Paul Rudd is the example I'll use here. Paul Rudd's we did this when we were discussing it. When were we discussing this?
This was when we were in prep. And you said, I was like, give an example of somebody beautiful, and Paul Rudd is your first example, which is fine. He's not a bad-looking guy, but is he the quintessential beautiful man?
So opposites should always come from each other. There's
I'm just going to ignore that.
There's no reason to think that at some time Paul Rudd must have been an ugly person, and there's no reason to think that all cold things must at some point have been warm. So it can't be opposite in this sense. So I think it has to be an opposite in terms of a contradiction. So that's the kind of opposite he does need. So the first thing to say is that he's saying that things become larger and smaller in relations. He says that things that become in kind of pairs, like hotness must come from coldness. And he seems to be using a different version when he says the soul is living. The fundamental thing to say here is the contradiction of living is not death. The contradiction of living is not living. So if we switch the argument around, it's a long way of winding of saying that being alive and dead aren't opposite states. An example, a rock is not alive, nor is it dead because it hasn't been living. So if the opposite of living is not alive, it's quite possible for us to think that a person, when they stop living, is now not living and therefore not alive at all. So it doesn't follow that this continual cycle. Once I've lived, I'm then the opposite of that, which is not living, and it doesn't necessitate the idea that I need to come back into being. So once you start thinking about what the opposite involves, it's quite clear that he's got the wrong idea for the opposite of what living is. And so the argument doesn't follow. And it seems like there's no way for me at least, there's no way of resurrecting this argument or bringing it back to life. It seems to be not living.
Seems. Oh God. One final point is on that note as well is at least a question that thought to myself as I was reading through it was talking about like whether or not if all things require opposites, and in which case, and he does, I think, almost outright say this, which is that like the forms themselves, because that must be the case, and then so if the forms are supposed to be like something that like concrete, eternal, and therefore not contingent upon anything else, well, if there is an opposite that requires the other, then in that some way feels as if they rely on one another in a way that isn't somehow eternal, like they cause each other into being. And if that's the case, then I'm not quite sure if that. And so
so is there a form of ugliness? Be a bit of a weird thing.
Well, no, like even that I think is fine. So even if there was an eternal form of like what it is to be ugly, and that like a person could position. Participate in ugliness and then later on in their life participate in beauty.
Yeah,
that I find is fine. The logical point I'm making is simply, does that mean that because there was beauty, ugliness must be there? And if that's the case, then like you could always say, well, which one came first, or are they both together? But then they're still reliant on one another and therefore not separate entities in their own right.
Okay, so argument one, it doesn't work. so let's
crack stuff.
Nothing that Socrates said. I'm not sure of what we can salvage from this at all, really. it seems like he's very confused, poor old Socrates on his deathbed, of what the opposite of living is. But from here on, actually, in the text, he tends to avoid this argument entirely. He doesn't really refer to it back again. The ones that he does refer to again are the next is the upcoming one in particular. So maybe Socrates himself wasn't entirely convinced, but he certainly thinks this next argument, which is about to unfold, is certainly something which we should take very, very seriously indeed. And it's called the argument from recollection. So without further ado, let's continue our reading of the Phaedo. Socrates, is knowledge simply recollection?
If I recall correctly, it is.
Your wit will be the death of you. What arguments are urged?
Our talents are wasted on philosophy.
Okay. Your wit will be the death of you. What arguments are urged in favour of this doctrine of recollection?
We should agree that what a man recollects is what he must have known at some previous time.
We should. For example, I recollect that at a previous time, Simius wasn't so unbearable.
And what is the nature of this knowledge or recollection?
What do you mean?
What is the feeling of lovers when they recognise a harp? Do they, from knowing the harp, form in their mind's eye an image of the youth to whom the harp belongs? And this is recollection, and there are endless examples of the same thing.
Endless.
And shall we proceed a step further and affirm that there is such a thing as equality, and over and above this there is absolute equality?
Yes, we agree entirely, for if you are wrong, I will crucify my godmother.
Well, equal enthusiasm. Simius, I'm inclined to agree.
And do we know the nature of this absolute essence?
Oh, sure.
When did we obtain our knowledge? Did we not see equalities of material things, such as pieces of wood and stones, and gather from them the idea of an equality which is different from them? For you acknowledge that there is a difference.
That much is certain.
Now, we must not allow that when I, or anyone looking at any object, observes that the thing which he sees aims at being much other thing, but falls short of and cannot be that other thing, but is inferior, he who makes this observation must have had a previous knowledge of that to which the other, although similar, was inferior.
Again, Socrates, I am in awe of your clarity in making such points.
And has not this been our own case in the matter of equals and of absolute equality?
Precisely.
Then we must have known equality previously to that time which we first saw the material equals, and reflected that all these apparent equals strive to attain absolute equality, but fall short of it.
Very true.
We recognize also that this absolute equality has only been known, and can only be known, through the medium of sight or touch, or of some other of the senses, which are all alike in this respect.
Yes, Socrates, I see where you're going with this.
Oh, do you, wiser Simius? How could you possibly have known that when Socrates says our senses are unreliable, that he might end up saying absolutes can only be understood through the soul alone, so if we were to recall these absolutes, the soul must have existed before the body? Fuck me, Simius. You are a dreary fellow.
Truer words have never been spoken, Sebes. This much is clear. Truer words have never been spoken, Sebes. This much is clear. Simius is a dreary fellow, and when we perceive something, either by the help of our senses, we are able to obtain a notion of some other thing, like or unlike, which is associated with it, but has been forgotten. Whence, either we had this knowledge at birth, continue to know through life, or after birth. Those who are said to learn only remember, and learning is simply recollect.
That's literally what Oh, forget it. Truer words have never been spoken, O wiser Socrates.
I am grateful to you, Sebes, for your unyielding enthusiasm.
And I'm ungrateful to you, Socrates, for your unwielding enthusiasm.
Sebes.
Ah, wonderful reading, gentlemen. So let's unpack the recollection argument. Really simply, Socrates is not saying that everything is recollection here when he says what we call learning is really just recollection. He's saying things in themselves, i.e. the forms, these universal, non-physical things, the things in themselves we learn through recollection. The point to begin with is that we know what equal is. And when we say that we know what equal is in itself, it's different when it's equal between two sticks. It's not actually what equal is when I put two sticks together. There's an absolute ideal form of equalness which when I look at the two sticks, I'm able to recall. So he says, I must have learned about this in some previous life, because all learning is recollection. Ollie, I think you're a Meno expert. Socrates mentions this, or Plato mentions this in an earlier dialogue.
Yeah, Plato's recollecting some of his previous work. Am I right? We could use that so many times. Yeah, so in one of Plato's earlier works, the Meno, again we are with Socrates, and he kind of introduces us to this idea of the recollection. So Socrates is kind of using his classic Socratic irony, going around and Socratic questioning as well. He uses the example of mathematics. Obviously, Plato was a big fan of the mathematics. I think, wasn't it about his
the geometry?
The geometry, yeah.
No one untrained in mathematics shall enter, or something.
Yeah,
It was just
it's geometry. Yeah, sorry.
Which is exclusionary, but we'll forgive him that. So, so in this story, Socrates is trying to explain to people that actually, we recollect. We don't necessarily learn things for the first time, but we already know them, and we're kind of reminded of them. And he uses this example of a slave. And what he does is he draws shapes on the floor, and then asks the slave whether they can tell him kind of more complex mathematical formulas and connections of what shapes are and how the shapes are connected, and etc. And he goes through like a square and a triangle. But I guess the bit that's important for us is that he says, look, even this slave can kind of answer my question. So this slave must be recording some knowledge of mathematics. Slaves aren't trained in mathematics. They're trained in, building stuff and, doing all of our work for us. So in this case, this example of he's saying that even the uneducated person can recollect previous knowledge. Which is an interesting argument in this sense. I mean, you could kind of level a criticism straight away, which is even in the Meno itself, he asks extremely leading questions towards the slave. So he's kind of effectively saying, it's a square, isn't it? And things like that. So it's not really, if we're with our critical analytic heads on, I think you can kind of get around this idea of what knowledge is recalled by if you could talk to anyone and kind of imply an answer. I mean, we talk about things like police coercion, for example, right, where people sometimes even confess to crimes they haven't done through police coercion, because they go you kind of did it, didn't you? Were you feeling this? You were feeling this, weren't you? So kind of human beings can be kind of tricked in a sense to kind of give the incorrect answer.
Good, but he, in the recollection argument in the Fido, he seems to be saying at least that what a quality is. There's an ideal form of a quality. That thing, but you can never experience it in the world. So you must have came across it at some point, and that point therefore must be before you have lived.
Yeah, and I appreciate for Socrates at the time, and just with the amount of knowledge that one could possibly have, get the argument. I guess it's interesting that with the more abstract things, they're often to do with values. So if it's something to do with justice or equality or beauty, that's stuff that potentially could just argue comes from the human mind in the first place. So it's not necessarily recollecting as such, but it presumably, whether there's some evolutionary reason for this or just whatever, but human beings are somehow wired to have a sense of beauty about the world. And so does that have to come from somewhere beyond? It might just be that you have this sensation of recollection. They're like, oh, I know what beauty is. I can't quite articulate it, but I know when I see beauty, simple kind of concept. You don't have to make that leap to say that it must have come from before. It's just that it could be potentially explained by just.
And maybe you guys could help me with this, because correct me if I'm wrong, but is Socrates saying that the soul exists before we're born in this body, and it has all knowledge at some point?
Yeah, it has to, because if you know what the true form of, say, a quality is, then you have to have came about it before. So, and one of the responses, kind of like Andrew's, is that actually no, maybe we just were born with this knowledge. It's like innate human knowledge. But I think that undermines exactly how Plato thinks we come about knowing things. So yes, you need to, perceiving the world is important. When we say that Plato's pure rationalism to understand things, it's missing the point really. When we see equal things, it helps us recollect something we learned before. You might think then that you might not buy into this idea of that we need to learn about things through the kind of perception, seeing things in themselves, as Plato says. So we don't have to follow him on that. according to one view I want to introduce is kind of a view which John Locke's often associated with on meaning and understanding, that when we learn things, it's not just by perception alone, but perception plus abstraction. So on this view, if we observe a number of things out there in the world, say blue things, and I show you loads of blue things, and I say that's blue, you can abstract the quality of what it is to be blue by looking at the comparisons across this. You look at everything apart of the apple, which for some reason this one's blue, or the bench, or the chair, and you say, now I know what blue is. As anyone who's listening is aware of, any epistemology is aware of, though, there's an infinite number of ways in which this can go wrong. So it's impossible to guard against me picking out the wrong thing from there. How do I pick out that same thing? You could generalize, look at all those things. To take a really crude and analytic example, how do I know that I should extract the idea of blueness from the idea of blue seen by me? So you couldn't do this by showing something that's blue that isn't seen by me. So how do I get blueness rather than seen by me blueness? I'm not saying that Locke's this view is right. It's simply a more palatable view that doesn't rely on this abstract metaphysics. Like, actually, if we can explain it in a more parsimonious worldview, then we should do that. So maybe follow Locke instead. But that's like a counter-argument, which, again, this is a good way to look at how we can do philosophy. A counter-argument's not going to be as good as like something that undermines one of the premises. Again, hence why I unpacked last time when we're looking at the last argument, the difference between opposites. Plato's making the same mistake here again. Equality is not a property in and of itself, an object. A property is a relational type of thing which has to hold between two different things. And it would seem odd for then Plato to say that actually all relations exist in forms in themselves as well, because relations depend on the existence of two properties or objects on either side of the biconditional or the conditional. And he seems to, so the second premise we might say is false, which, just to remind you of that, as I go back to it, is that everything, that there is such a thing as true equality, the equal in itself. No, there's no such thing as equal in itself. There's only equality between two different objects.
It's 0-2 Socrates. Sorry, guys.
I feel like we're just, like, at least in the last ones, we kind of defended Socrates a little bit. This time around, I feel like we're just like, here's the argument, here's why it's wrong, moving on.
Well, when we get onto the further analysis at the end, it's the whole foundation of his philosophy is built on wonky foundations, shall we say.
Built his house upon the sand.
He did.
So,
yeah.
do you know who that was?
Sand. Castles made of sand fall in the sea eventually. That's Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. I didn't know that.
I don't think that was what you were talking about. But
it's nice. They're like built on legendary quicksand.
One of the what?
No, there's so like.
Let me help you recall. Here's some sand.
No, I swear it's someone like AJ Ayer or something like that.
Sounds like it's a bad analogy, and so yeah, I'm sure it is AJ.
Ouch! Eat your heart.
It's not like any AJ fans listening to the show.
Yeah, AJ doesn't have fans.
So unlike AJ's Language, Truth and Logic, we're going to go into an exciting reading here of the Fido.
Oh, burn! No, seriously, don't read the book. I have. It's boring. And wrong.
He's not talking about the Fido, but that is equally as wrong, one might argue. Shall we take it away for a final reading for this instalment of the Fido?
We ought to ask ourselves this. What sort of thing is it that would naturally suffer the fate of being dispersed? If we answer this, we will know of which sort the soul belongs. Then we shall know whether we should feel confidence or fear about the weight of our soul.
Your argument already is a weight on my soul, Socrates. Do get on with it.
Would you not expect a natural compound to be liable to break up where it was put together?
Most certainly.
Ought not anything which is really incomposite to be the one thing of all others that is not affected in this way?
That seems to be the case.
Is it not extremely probable that what is always constant and invariable is incomposite, and what is inconstant and variable is composite?
You sure know how to make a mountain out of a molehill, Socrates. If you're saying that the soul is indestructible and the body is destructible, then we inevitably agree. Oh man of great wisdom and virtue.
Do you remember our discussions of the forms?
How could I forget?
How do you recall?
Surely equality or beauty itself can never admit any change of any kind.
Your beauty is unchanged, Socrates.
That doesn't make any sense. Do go on, Socrates.
Well, what about many instances of beauty, such as men, horses, clothes, and so on?
They seem to be mere instances of beauty. Do continue, Socrates. But from here on, I encourage you to put your lust for horses aside.
assume two classes of things that may be such and such, one visible and the other invisible?
I agree.
I thought you might.
Let us consider the body and the soul. Which of these would be visible?
Well, the body, of course.
And what of the soul?
Invisible?
You're wiser than you are tall, Simius.
What?
You almost want you need to continue immediately.
The thing is, I can't have a reaction, but I really want to react. Okay. Then what of the soul?
Invisible?
You're wiser than you are tall, Simius. What? You will remember when we said when the mind inquires through the senses of the body, it becomes dazed, confused, and tipsy. But when the soul investigates by itself, it passes into the realm of the pure, the everlasting, the deathless, and the changeless.
Even the most dim-witted person would agree, Socrates.
I couldn't agree more. Now, if the soul is more like the heavens and the earth, is this where the soul will go upon release from the body?
You are a clever-witted halfling, Simius. The body eventually disintegrates, but because of the soul, it's indissoluble. It must go to the place like itself, glorious, pure, and invisible, into the presence of the good and wise God.
Did he just call me a halfling?
I think so. Seems to become more generous as the hour draws near.
Steves! Awesome, wonderfully read again, gentlemen, if I don't mind saying so myself. You're a natural Socrates. Ollie, I think I've really enjoyed your Socrates' reading. It's next to those of your best readings. Have you considered a career in voice acting?
Only if Andy does, because I think Siebes is still in the show, if I'm honest.
He is one witty fellow, isn't he? And he's twice the man, tall-wise, than Simius will ever be. So we've had two arguments for immortality up to this point. The first told us the soul never stops existing. It told us nothing about its nature. Then we finally got, as we saw a moment ago, the argument from recollection, which we didn't actually mention in the analysis last time. It seems to tell us that the soul not only existed before death, like the previous argument already told us, but something it would be like for that soul to exist. So if all knowledge is recollection, then the soul must be able to perceive the forms or other things when it dies, not through one of its five senses, but it should be able to be acquainted with things like equality. So we've got a bit here, if we take those two arguments together, and Socrates suggests basically here that you could just stick the two arguments together as if that would help us, but we've already seen there's problems with them. But if those two arguments did work, which as we've seen they don't, give us afterlife and perception and reason, and it kind of gives us a picture of what the afterlife will look like. But as we've said, the cyclical argument seems to be left behind, and he introduces this new argument which seems a lot more palatable. And me and Andrew were talking about this maybe this morning or a few days ago. I actually find this affinity argument that we're going to talk about here, I didn't think it would be, but I found it the most interesting out of all of them because it tied in together, I think, what Plato thinks about the soul more than any of them. I'll unpack it really briefly. So we essentially get two analogies, as we've just seen in the text. One between souls and forms, and the other between souls and gods. So let's just use the forms. Plato says they're invisible, unchanging, and eternal. On the other hand, things that bear the same name, i.e. everyday objects, they're visible, changing, and perishable. And then Plato simply asks us, so which of these two kinds of things does the soul resemble the most? The invisible and changing, or the physical, changing, and perishable, he says. It's probably going to be more like the forms, and subsequently like the gods, than it is going to be like tables and chairs. And everyone seems to think this is fantastic. Not just yet, but they seem quite complicit in the argument as it's going along.
So Plato himself in the text says that, and he's using an analogy, and he's saying that analogies don't give conclusive 100% evidence. They can kind of guide us in the right direction, but he himself is admitting that he's just using an analogy with this argument, and it can't really go the full way. You can't really get like a full deductive, basic 100% airtight argument with an analogy.
And we see the same with Siebes. It applies to Siebes and Samias' objections that we'll look at next week. Andrew, you two, speaking again off microphone, you like Samias' objection to this argument? Something we'll talk about later, but did you want to give your thoughts on it here?
Yeah, I mean, the basic point in which Socrates somewhat fails on, at least from Samias' point of view, is that simply we can conceive of things that may very well be invisible and maybe incomposite, yet don't have to have the quality of everlasting. Samias uses the example of a harmony. We won't talk about that in detail now, but in the same way as, like, let's say analogies, for instance, with God, you can see a lot of the similar problems with these ideas of the soul, right? So, like, if you know Aquinas's talk about religious language, which we're not going to get into here, but if you can liken God to so many different things, and you can build up as many examples as you can, but you just can't give a clear enough proof for you to actually feel confident in making that leap, assuming that you want to play that game of just complete reason and logic, which is what Socrates is presumably doing. And as Ollie's already said, he even concedes that it's not perfect. So I'm not even really sure why you should be buying into this from the get-go. Yeah, they're not convinced, I'm afraid.
Good. And it's just that it's more probable than not that it is tied to this, isn't it? But yeah, it seems anti-Socratic on the basis of the other kind of proofs that he gives across many of the dialogues. But for me, what really stuck out was when Socrates asks us which it resembles rather than which it belongs to, it's a great clue not into just what he thinks the soul is, but perhaps a fundamental problem across this whole of the Phaedo. We can say that the soul is invisible, but do we want to say that it's unchanging like everything else? I'll give a quote from Socrates which might explain this further. He says, quote, "Every pleasure or pain has some sort of nail which nails and rivets the soul to the body and pins it down and makes it corporeal." Now, we've got this idea later on of the afterlife myth, of reincarnation, and the reason why the soul wants to come back to Earth and doesn't escape the cycle of rebirth is because it wants to come back. Maybe it likes lying on the beach in the sunshine, maybe it likes studio headphones or Gus and Luger backpacks or something like this, or it likes Paul Rudd's new series, Living With Yourself on Netflix. All these fantastic things, the pleasures of the body. All the pleasures are kind of riveting on the soul in the physical sense, like they drag the soul down. So the soul can't be changing. It can't belong to the category of the completely unchanging. And if you think this not only is interesting from the Platonic sense, but think of religions like Hinduism or Christianity, where the character of your soul and how you change it, the things that you do in your life, determine what happens to the soul after death. So if it's completely unchanging, then it seems like it's unfair for some souls to go off to this rational realm and some to come back to Earth.
Yeah, and the thing is, Socrates even says that in the myth of the afterlife. Like, there are certain souls that live so badly, presumably so completely boggled down with vices that they are completely irredeemable and that they effectively go to hell. And yeah, how that works it doesn't fit with anything else he's said.
A quote, because I've mentioned this a few times, and it's David Bostock's point from Plato's Phaedo, his guide to it. He says, Plato treats the soul as if it were made of some kind of quasi-material stuff, and just the kind of thing that might be blown apart by the wind, especially if you happen to die in a storm. Like, it's not completely immaterial and unchanging. It's more like that thing. But if it's like the physical thing, it's not clear exactly what it is. So all he says here is that the soul is most like them, most akin to it, but he doesn't show us that it's indestructible. He hasn't proven what he wanted to.
Right. And that links directly into Siebes's response as well, which is, we could, as you just said there, maybe it is like more like, but still retains some sort of material property, in which case we could just say, well, maybe it just lasts for like a really long time, but eventually dies. And, you know, off the top of my head, I can't even technically remember what is to that point, but it's not.
He says that the soul, its essential property, not its accidental property,
like, yes, right,
is living.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that later.
A dead soul makes no sense, he says.
Yes.
Just like,
is here are yeah. Oh yeah. Doesn't mean it. Into what we're doing.
Fleshy.
If somebody can.
Yeah, it seems like it's coming through.
Okay, cool. Signal station? Is that you? face when I see that, Chase?
Oh no, I was looking at the Twitch and probably reacting to my own face.
No, I do that a lot. Goofy faces. I think I look super handsome, so I look silly. So,
yeah.
Tonight we are playing Trophy Dark with Chase. Hello, all. I believe Chase has played this game before. Never played it.
Have you played it?
That's good. That's good. So, everybody, the three of you already know. In general, it's a storytelling game. It's a playing game, but we're kind of towards the story game. And a group of treasure hunters doomed expedition into an environment. Normally, we say a forest, the kind of original thing. Tonight, we will not be in a forest. In a significantly more supernatural. So what we're going to do is I'm going to very quickly introduce the incursion. So Trophy is organized where adventures are called incursions. The incursion is composed of 5. Ring 1. Hopefully get to ring 5. For ring 4. Just depends. And as we do that, your character will change. To be clear, your characters are doomed. They're either going to die or somehow become part of the environment, or wish they were dead if they somehow survive. Chase is grinning because I think when we played before, this is
very much wishing he was dead.
Yeah, like this is worse than death. So, like I said, I'll introduce the incursion quick as we do that. So, come to me with sword and axe as my trophy. Come to me with spells that you deem wise as my trophy. Your eyes. As my trophy. Once there lived the most powerful wizard in all. Their magic was strong, usual, but they wanted nothing more than to discover and learn. Legend has it that they even ventured into the Kaldor to wrest magical secrets from this and to ensure their own immortality. Successful, they came back even greater than before, and with time, they grew to an immense statue. First overshadowing trees, then cities, then mountains. That was when the gods themselves decided to intervene against this giant. The godsmith Vestor forged a mighty lance. The demon enchantress Terka provided a deadly poison. Hero chant pierced the giant. Crying out, the wizard fell with a mighty sound, leveling hills and forests under their a giant's carcass, not alive, but not truly dead. The legends claim that the giant still wears the sigil the forest gave them on their is what keeps them. Even more outrageous claim that brave treasure hunters entered the giant's carcass and there retrieved the sigil, thus becoming those tonight. So, who you are, who you will be playing. Okay, so let's start with you.
Yeah. You can find me at Promonger on Twitter. Tonight I will be playing Theoden. I have the audio just loud enough that it's mind flooding me from Twitter. Anyway, I will be playing Theoden, who is a leech, formerly a defrocked priest, and my goal is to make my rival in the Twin Cities Roar and Rar regret their victory over me. They are an academic rival, and I would like to prove them wrong with something that I discover in this giant wizard's body. I'm a doctor.
Doctor who is no longer a priest. About your ritual. So in Trophy,
yeah,
you can have a. When you reach 6 ruin, you die, otherwise lost. So, and you always start with at least 1 ruin. So effectively in this game, you have a maximum of 5 hit points. But for every starting, like a spell, your starting ruin by 1. You have chosen Sigil of the Liver and Sigil of the Stomach. And tell us these rituals.
Yeah, so the Sigil of the Liver does what livers do in a very simple way. It cures any poison from a body, possibly expelling it out from that body. Just wear gloves. Okay. And the Sigil of the Stomach, oh no, that's not a sigil, it's just stomach. Inside out. So you can like...
That actually is a... It is
fair enough.
Stomach. Yeah.
Just so you can get to the important bits that you want to get to.
The other thing about rituals is not only do they increase your starting ruin, but every time you try to cast, you have to do what we call, and we'll explain it when we get there. Risk roll, meaning there's a chance you can increase your ruin even further. So rituals are in the world of Trophy, in the game of Trophy, is powerful. Cure any poison, but extremely dangerous. So, Theoden, introduce yourself and your character.
Sure. Hi, I'm Abby. You can find me at Xtreme Warlock on Twitter. And I'm playing Leon, the sorcerer cured beast bitten, who very much wants to publish her discoveries from ancient culture.
A question. When we say cured beast bitten, first question is, does that mean she is no longer she's been cured from that curse, or just she has control of it?
Control.
Okay, that's good enough. And what kind of beast? Could be a wolf, could be something else. Whatever you like. There's no real restriction here.
A bat.
Bat. Oh. Fantastic. Okay. And you have chosen also to take 2 rituals.
Yes. They are inhabit, and you can possess a person or animal, which I think is slightly self-explanatory. You can inhabit something. And then there's Sigil of the Eyelash, where you can temporarily blind another. Like, you get an eyelash. Yeah.
And then
I'm Arax. Tonight I will be playing Sybil, who has taken on the role of Ox. Their background is that of a cooled infernal. My drive is to free my brothers from the prison.
So, for anybody watching, like Cold Infernal, if you happen to know, that one of the default ones he wanted to do, and so we made it happen because he is doomed anyway. Now, that said, while this is a one-shot, we will be done after tonight. There is a campaign version of Trophy called Trophy Gold that Chase and I have played before. Later, because and to be clear, I have no affiliation with. I really like the game. They have a Kickstarter starting. Again, I've got no affiliation. So, Void, I believe I know who that is. Not so. Very well. Go around. So, this time, we start addressing you by your character name. Sybil.
Yes.
Dude, what does Sybil like about his body?
Well, I suppose it'd be fine if I explained what a cool infernal was.
Yeah, great.
I am part of a race of living coal and charcoal. We are created by the infernal forces to heat whatever engines or they need. Our existence is that of torture and mutilation, birthed from the coal in these humanoid forms, as cooked with these wrought iron to keep the fires going, each of them piercing into our skin, fear and pain. Earth. I escaped the pit. I suppose I like most about my body was the face of the torturer who I ripped off and my stomach to repair the damage that he did to me.
Second question. What would you change?
Alrighty. How's everybody doing tonight? It's Friday night. Hope you all had a great week. Process of launching an impeachment investigation. President of the United States. And ladies and gentlemen, how do you spell backfire? This is going to be the most awesome thing. We're here to see it. It's going to be glorious. Aloha from Yokohama. Nice to see you too, Mark. Yeah, I've been I spent yesterday about 19 hours working on the show prep. And I worked on it all day again today, and I'm not even close to done. This is so exciting what is coming. I'll tell you exactly how I came up with what we're going to get into here in a minute. But tonight's show is called Genesis Gambit. And you know how a few episodes ago we talked about Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. The Wrath of Khan is bang on target, man. It's very exciting. I'll turn it down just. That's a version of the Mission Impossible song that I could license for like pennies. So I licensed it. I'm excited too. So anyway, so the search term that I used in the queue was Iran. Now, if you remember from The Wrath of Khan, that was a movie about a guy and his I don't know, compatriots isn't the right word, but fellow genetic engineering hybrids. These guys took over the Earth in 1996, according to the storyline of Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, and also the Space Seed, which was its antecedent. And the idea behind the whole show was that these guys took over the Earth, and then once they knocked out all the capitalists, the communists took over, frozen them, put them in the freezing system, suspended animation, and then launched them off into space. And what was interesting about the episode is that, as we find out near the end, Carl Nunyan Singh is his name in the show, is a Persian, and he is a stand-in for Lucifer himself. And if you read your Bible, you know that we battle against principalities and powers. And the principality and power in the book of Daniel that he was fighting against was the spiritual prince of Persia, Iran. And when you do the decode in the queue, you get 123 references that come back. And holy smokes, do I have a show for you. The next 4 shows are going to be the outcome of that deep dive. Why? What does it say? Well, here's what it's going to say. It's going to lay out all of the accusations against Deep State. Exactly what, and exactly when, and exactly how much. Who received the funds? Who is standing against it? And by the way, the fact that they would actually come up with a trial against the president, an impeachment, and that the president would not only turn the tables on them, which is just about to occur, but he would do it in such a spectacular way as to lay waste the entire deep state organization globally, not just in the United States. This was a setup from the beginning, and it's too late now. It's too late. So I'm going to come out and tell you all about what's coming down the pipe. I can't wait to get into it. Switched over to Periscope. By the way, for those that did not get your show announcement, your Get Alert tonight, the website for Wix, which is our internet provider for our website, they are down right now. They have been down for the last hour and a half, and so we have not been able to send out the show announcement. And you need that because this is the one that has the updated sauce packet, the updated database for the White House visitor logs. That's going to turn out to be really important when we get into tonight's show. So sorry you don't get it, but it's okay because this is just a first part of a 4-part sub-series on this whole Project Genesis business, this Genesis Gambit. And why do we call it a gambit? Oh, this is so cool. In the show, in the Star Trek show, we're gonna go back and look at a couple of scenes out of it. And the scenes that we're gonna pull up are why exactly they named it Genesis. And what was the idea? So it's
Finger leads to a in your fist bleed in the tide of the force. Weakness.
It's so bright, it's hard to breathe.